Hi there, my name's Peter Eastway and I'd like to show you how I used Capture One to get from this to this. It's in a world of squareals, as Christian Fletcher, my friend, calls them. The squareal is the popular photograph whether you are shooting in Iceland or, as in this case, in the Kimberley in the far north of Australia. There are a lot of wonderful colours just hiding away in the base of this image. The sand flats, the tidal flats, there's not much colour there, and we're quite high looking down obviously, and there's a lot of atmosphere in between. So we have to bring up the contrast and bring up the colour. So where do we start with that colour? So I've come over to my white balance tool, and you can try A as an automatic starting point, and that's not too bad. But sometimes I find it a little bit challenging to get it just right. So I click on my Pick White Balance tool, and I can choose different balances just by choosing different areas. Now, from experience, I found that clicking in this little area here works quite well. And sometimes if I were to enlarge the picture up, and I find these little areas just next to the wet sand there, and that often gives me the best result. Another trick for working this sort of stuff out is I often come along and I increase the saturation up. And by increasing the saturation, then when I click and move around, I end up in slightly different positions, but at least I can see what's happening with that colour. You can see that by getting the colour balance right and ramping up the saturation, where the basis of the photograph is, it's already starting to come together. But what about that square shape? Well, let's go and move over to the crop tool and also to the lens panel down here and down to the keystone. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to stretch the image out, and it just makes it a little bit squarer in shape. I'll come up then to my crop tool, make sure it's set for square, and then it's just a matter of clicking and stretching, and there we have my squareal. So that worked quite easily. Okay, so let's make a bit of a splash with this. Let's move over to my local adjustments. I'm going to add in another adjustment, and I'll call it red. And I get my brush, and I'm just going to paint in the areas that I want to adjust. Now, by leaving the green in the middle untouched, and also the grey areas of wet sand, there's real colours, natural colours. So now when I go and adjust these other colours and ramp them up a little bit, that'll look a little bit more natural too. It'll just be expected. Now obviously I would spend a little bit more time than I have here to get that mask exactly right. But I come over to my exposure tab, grab the saturation, just drag that up. And if that's not quite enough, come down to my colour editor, use the selector there, pick on a nice, an orangey colour, drag it out a little bit, smooth the edges off and ramp up the saturation, and there's my colour coming in. If the colour's not quite right, I can adjust the hue around one way or another. I think I prefer a little bit more of an orange in it today. And then we can go over to our clarity tool, grab the clarity slider and drag that up to the right, and you can see all of that detail popping in. So the image is almost there. I look at the top area though, and I find that that is a little bit light. So let's go and add in another adjustment. The local adjustment, press the right button, there we go, and we'll call it top. And grab this time we'll use the gradient mask, and I'll just grab the gradient and drop it down to there. Come along to my exposure, just darken it down fractionally, maybe lower the contrast so it'll smooth out a little bit more, just drop it down. And then I find that that's working well, except that I don't necessarily want this area here at the top to be dark, because I want the eye to feel that it can flow through. So I'll come over and with my erase mask brush, I'll just get rid of a little bit of that up there, so it just allows me allows the eye to just sort of keep following through. A little bit rough and ready there, so let's just come back and we'll go to the gradient mask. We'll just redo that again. I just might take that down a little bit further. There we go. Come along and grab the erase brush and whiz back up. And you can see that it's very straightforward to do, and you can just explore and adjust the mask until you feel warm and fuzzy about it. So that's just about it. I might come back to my background layer. I might revisit a vignette and just darken the edges just fractionally, not much, just a squiz. Looking at the overall image, maybe I could just increase the contrast a fraction more, just lighten it up, and I reckon we've got it. There you have it. The Kimberley in Northern Australia. Great place for a PODAS workshop. And this one was actually taken on a PODAS workshop. Cheers.